Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Lisa Miller, and I am the Assistant Director of Engagement Strategy. I wanted to begin our time together by sharing our land acknowledgement. Both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupied the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory, whose connection remains today. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children. Now, students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native Nation neighbors. Thank you. During this episode, there will be time for questions toward the end of the presentation. So if you have anything to ask Kevin, please click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen to submit your question. To do so, you may need to exit out of the full screen view to see the Ask a Question button. This session will be recorded and posted on our Alum Learning Consortium's past event recordings page in the next 2 to 3 business days. Now, please welcome our moderator for today's session, Heather Pieper-Olson, Vice President of Institutional Advancement.
Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening for tonight's episode of St. Ben's at Home. Tonight, we're so fortunate to welcome Dr. Kevin Clancy, Director of the Center for Global Education at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. Hello, Kevin.
Good evening, Heather.
How are you this evening?
I'm doing great, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am so excited to have you here, and we know lots of folks are really excited about this as well. And we're going to pretend that it is a sunshiny day and 72 degrees here in St. Joe, but it is always that when you're with us. So we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So tonight's topic is one that is sure to unleash a lot of nostalgia among our listeners who studied abroad, or maybe some envy for those who didn't, and those who aren't currently in college and can't take advantage of opportunities to engage globally. But here are a few nuggets to enchant all of our listeners. Global education, and more widely global engagement, is a big deal at St. Ben's and St. John's. It's one of our institutional learning goals, in fact. Today, nearly 50% of St. Ben's and St. John's students study abroad by the time they graduate. Of the students who study abroad, about 60% are Bennies and about 40% are Johnnies. I would also note that St. Ben's is ranked number 9 among small colleges nationally for the number of CSB students who receive the prestigious Department of State's Gilman Scholarship. Maybe you can tell us about that a little later. And St. Ben's and St. John's have also received the Senator Paul Simon Award for Comprehensive Internationalization from the Association of International Educators. St. Ben's and St. John's are renowned for our global education programs and have been for years. So let's dive into all that global goodness and what it takes to achieve and maintain that level of excellence. So tell us a little bit about how study abroad has changed over time and how did those changes come to be?
Sure. Well, I think if many of our listeners will probably, or viewers will probably remember their own study abroad experiences. And I myself had a study abroad experience in 98 in China and then graduated in 2000. But it's changed considerably over the last probably decade. And that is previously the majority of our students, and the majority of our students do continue to do semester programs, but we've seen a high increase in students doing short-term programs too. And so that's been a large change that we've seen between semester and short-term. And then the other thing, Heather, that's been really exciting is the growth of experiential learning. And what I mean by that is, in addition to the study abroad experience, students are doing internships and they're doing undergraduate research during the time that they're abroad. So there's been a fair amount of change actually from just the semester abroad, and also an increase in destinations too.
So tell us a little bit about that, actually. I think, when I think about short term, I think many of our viewers might assume that you're thinking sort of, the J term that used to be, or some of those kinds of things, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about. What do the short term study abroad sort of look like?
Sure. Well, I think maybe to set the picture, let's start with semester and then I'll go into short term. So with semester, it's still quite large. So we have 15 semester programs in 13 countries. And if you look at all of our students who do study abroad, 60% of those students do semester programs.
Okay.
And then the majority of those semester programs are faculty led. And so that continues to be the leading part of our portfolio, if you will, for study abroad. But then in addition to that, we've also seen a huge growth in short-term programs. And so this coming academic year, we'll actually have 10 short-term programs that will be going abroad. And so these short-term programs the majority of them are actually, we call them embedded programs now, and that students start taking the program during the second half of spring semester. So they start the program on campus. And then in May, they go abroad on an international field extension of that program for 2 to 3 weeks. And so the idea behind short-term programs is, even though it's less time, it's not a lesser experience. It's a very kind of intense experience abroad, and we front load a lot of the context on campus, but then when they're abroad, they have an opportunity to really explore what it looks like in that course. So for example, we have a fermentation course for chemistry where they're looking at fermentation in Belgium.
Feels very
and the Netherlands.
appropriate to our culture.
Yes.
And we've lots of Johnny Benny brewers
Yes.
in our midst, and probably future then as well.
Yeah, but the exciting thing about this is actually, while they're on campus, they have the opportunity to go to Fulton,
Very cool.
to go to Bad Habit, to go to a lot of these kind of local breweries, but also places where our Johnnies and Bennies are working, to kind of get to see like what it looks like, and then they have an opportunity to go and see it abroad. But then also doing research in Tanzania on an abroad program, Chiapas, Mexico, looking
I
at
was
social
thinking
justice.
of Roy
Yes.
Ketchum's class there,
Yes.
and some of that work that those classes have also brought that work back to campus
Right.
with the Theater of the Oppressed, if I am correct on that as well.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So where the short-term programs are really interesting is that semester programs are wonderful, but they tend to be encapsulated in a semester. So students will go and have that experience abroad, and then they'll come back to campus. Well, a short term gives us the opportunity to start the course on campus and then connect it to an abroad experience. And so it's actually a bridge between the international experience and the campus experience. And so we've actually seen kind of an explosion of interest among faculty who are developing these courses, and students too. So it's a way for students who might not have the opportunity to study abroad for a semester, maybe due to some of their course requirements, to be able to have that study abroad experience. Or not all students want to study abroad for a full semester, can study abroad for a full semester. And so short term is a way for them to continue to have an abroad experience. And so I think that's been an exciting way that we've tried to balance out the portfolio.
That's great. So are these classes that students can kind of count on year after year, or do they change as faculty bring a different class kind of?
Yeah,
online?
so that's a really good question. So if we go back in time a little bit, our first short-term program was started in fall of 19. Okay.
Oh,
so
suspicious timing.
Yeah, suspicious timing. So we were just getting short-term, this short-term embedded model up and running.
What was that first course?
It was fermentation.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we have had short-term programs before at St. Vincent
Right.
John's, but the fermentation course was really our first foray into starting a course on campus and then connecting it abroad. So if some of our viewers remember J-term, for example, that was an isolated kind of term that wasn't connected to fall or spring.
Right.
But the short-term embedded it's actually embedded in this case into the spring semester. And we've also done some in the fall semester too. But yeah, chemistry was the first one. And, we were kind of getting up and running on that. And then COVID hit, and then that went on pause, and a lot of other things went on pause.
Yeah.
But, we are really kind of picking it up in earnest. The other thing that I'd like to mention too, especially with the alumna connection that we have with the Bahamas, is Deborah Pembleton really developed, I think, a very fascinating course. So Dr. Deborah Pembleton
in our global business department, if you don't know Deborah.
Yep, thank you. In the global business, started a course that looks at international management and organizations, that starts on campus, but then they travel to the Bahamas to see our Bahamian alums and all the wonderful work they're doing in their companies
in
and
management, in
organizations.
accounting, in all facets of, Ministry of Education across the board, but that so many are so actively involved in both business and government and leadership in the Bahamas. What an amazing way to connect.
Yes.
And bring our students, into the Bahamas in a different way.
Right. And so that's been, a really fascinating course, and one that we hope to continue to build upon too, because not only does it provide exposure to really some fascinating things that are happening in the Bahamas, but also because of our heritage in the Bahamas of connecting our students to those experiences.
That's great. I'm going to take a step back because we dove all the way in, which is great. And I love that too. But let's take a little bit of a step back. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what exactly is the Center for Global Education?
That's a good place to begin. So the Center for Global Education encompasses, I'd say, three main parts. And we've already talked about some of those, but study abroad, which is encompassing semester programs and short-term programs. And then what we also do is we host students from our partner institutions that will come here for a semester. So for example, we have a long-standing partnership with Bunkyo Gakuin University in Tokyo. And right now we have students from that institution that are here for a semester, or in this case, a year. And so we'll also host, they're not international students who are here for 4 years. That falls under the Multicultural Center, but we work with our partner institutions with students who are here for a semester, for a year. And so that's the second part. The third part, Heather, I'd say, is the Center for Global Education plays a role in facilitating a cross-campus conversation on internationalization. And so what I mean by that is really trying to broaden the lens of internationalization from just traveling internationally, kind of geographic travel, to having a conversation about what does it look like to engage globally on our campus.
It's great. We have a light situation. I don't know if it's noticeable for others. It doesn't seem to be on camera, but in the room, it was like a little bit stroby in this room. So if it looks like we're having a dance party, that's why. That's fascinating. And I think we'll definitely continue to have the conversation around internationalization as well. So, but let's talk a little bit about, we've had some conversation about the Experience Hub, and we've had our colleagues in Experience and Professional Development, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about the Experience Hub and the Center for Global Education's role there and sort of what it's doing on campus. Because I think we had some guests on campus this weekend, and one of the bits of feedback we got was how impressed they were with the Experience Hub and the idea of bringing these three main areas together physically, but then also the synergies that are coming from that. So tell us a little bit more from your perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question, because the Experience Hub is something that I'm really excited about. And so taking a step back, something in higher education that we know really makes a difference in the lives of students are what are called high impact practices. And there's multiple high impact practice, but three of the high impact practices are study abroad, internships, and undergraduate research. And as it turns out, we've got three areas on our campus that are really strong in that: Center for Global Education with study abroad, Experience and Professional Development with internships, and the Office of Undergraduate Research. And so, we had this idea, Heather, which you helped to facilitate a conversation earlier. It was one of those conversations during COVID where we had a chance to step back and kind of imagine. But we said, what would it look like if we were really intentional about bringing these high impact practices, at least three signature high impact practices, together underneath the umbrella of what we're calling the Experience Hub. And the idea being that what we know from literature and what we know from higher education is that we don't want students to approach their learning like a buffet. If you can get a little bit of this or a little bit of that, but we're trying to be more intentional about bringing it all together. And so this allows us to welcome students into a space, and in one place let them know, okay, here are multiple different options that you have. And we start talking with the students about that from their very first classes in their first year. And just, I think, an important stat to share is that we know that if students, well, the literature tells us that if students participate in one high impact practice, they're more likely to participate in two. In doing our own survey of looking at our own data between these different areas, we found that if a student participates in one of the experiences at St. Ben, St. John's, they're 3 times more likely to participate in a second experience. And so I bring that up because rather than trying to compete for students, what we found is that in working together by a student coming to study abroad, and I could say, hey, are you interested in internships? Are you interested in undergraduate research? If they go into one of those different areas, they're still pretty likely to come to a study abroad experience. And so there's a synergy between these areas. And the Experience Hub is really our attempt to bring these together. And I'm excited about it because it's something that is relatively innovative right now in the space of higher education to bring all these programs together in the way that we've done in the Experience Hub.
Well, and I think too, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of our semester-long study abroad programs have internships embedded in them, and others where they're directly related to majors like nursing have experiential opportunities related to public health and those. So, there is a natural, that's just one example of that sort of natural synergy that would make sense if you're an internship and how we do that well.
Yes.
We have the professionals there and you're expert in that, in the international aspect of it, and sort of having that be together and working with faculty, I imagine, is probably easier if that's an opportunity where they all sort of know where to come and create those opportunities for students.
Going back to one of your original questions, Heather, you asked what has changed in study abroad. And I'd say if we were to go back to our era, not trying to date you, but I'd say within our era, I would say that probably a student on a semester study abroad experience would have maybe 5 courses that they could choose from. Today, we need to operate differently because our students are looking for a multitude of more courses that they need, to stay on track for graduation. And so I'd say one difference is that we see now probably on average students have closer to 20 courses that they can choose from.
Oh, wow.
In addition to the faculty-led
Right.
course. Now, the second thing that I think is really important, students and employers are looking for students to have more and more intentional internships and experiential learning. And so we have really built out internships. And so I'd say that on about 4 or 5 of our program sites, students can now do internships as part of their semester experience.
That's incredible and really great. And I think that brings that experience to bear for that, like that sort of the classroom and then the real world experience and making that alive too. And we know too, we've talked about this here, the importance of cultural competence in employers are really looking for that as well. And so actually doing this work in an international setting and already having that on your resume, I imagine would be a benefit for students as they leave here.
Yeah, so if I could throw out just a few more stats, what we have seen is that 75% of employers within the US are looking for global competence. And, what we believe at St. Ben, St. John's is a way that we can show that is by students having the study abroad experience, but not only having a study abroad experience, but being able to say, I was abroad. And when I was abroad, I had the opportunity to do these internships or this undergraduate research. And so the other thing that, we have heard and that research has shown us is that students who have a study abroad experience are more likely to find a job sooner, have shown, I think it's about $7,000 more in earnings, in their salary, actually, according to one survey by a group called IES, who does international work. So I think that anecdotally, we hear from students and from their parents and from the experience that study abroad has been a really positive experience. But also quantitatively, we can point to research that shows that it does make a difference for students when they're seeking employment.
And that we know there's a financial investment, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too, but it does sound that investment has a very clear return.
Yes.
As as our students as our graduates going into their professional life. So it does sort of that time, that investment here actually does pay off when they leave, which is great.
It does, and it certainly can.
That's fantastic. So I want to talk about, things are great now. It's 2023. Our students are back and they're traveling again, and our faculty are doing that. But it's been a rough couple years. So why don't you talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted internationalization on our campus, and then specifically how it affected the study abroad programs?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think that that anyone wants to return to March of 2020
No.
or April of 2020. But from a higher education perspective, it was challenging, and from a global education perspective, it was really fundamentally devastating. And I know that there are students, and our heart goes out to them who were studying abroad in the spring and had it cut short because everyone came back by April. And then there was a whole year of 2020 to 2021 where we didn't have anyone studying abroad, and so there were a lot of students who this was part of their college plan that weren't able to have that experience during that year. So Heather, it was, if I'm getting my dates right, it was in fall 21 that we started kind of inching back into study abroad. And there were a lot of COVID protocols in place, and it was a rather interesting time for those students who did study abroad, because once they got into country, they could not leave that country just because of the COVID protocols. But for the students in that fall, if you can imagine like a place like Paris where there were no tourists, it was only locals.
Oh, wow.
Or, a place like Rome where there were no tourists. And so students would talk about like having these cities to themselves with the locals. And so it was a really unique time in history that probably outside of World War II, you'd never have again. So, so it was a more intimate experience. And I'd say, the other thing that was interesting as well is that generally on semester study abroad, we have a lot of juniors. We had a ton of seniors, who ended up, just deferring that from their junior year. So it was a really special time. There was, I think, a gratitude on behalf of all of us of just being able to get back to this, because we had taken it for granted for so long. And then I'd say by spring 22, things started picking back up again. And so, we're to the point now with this academic year, 22-23, where I'd say it's pretty much back to normal. And so we're really kind of getting up to speed. And so it's kind of all systems go. But it did take, several years to kind of get things up and running again. I'd say that a permanent change that has come from this is actually over COVID. A little fun fact is, our study abroad program goes back over 50 years now, just over 50 years.
It's incredible.
But over the course of 2 years, we changed over 50% of the semester programs. And so I'd say there's probably been more change in the last few years than there have been in the history of semester study abroad. And that was driven by a real need to increase our health and safety protocols. I'd say that they were already strong, but with COVID and in needing to kind of adapt to a brave new world, if you will, we had to make sure that our protocols were strengthened in all of our locations. And then as we made changes with those protocols, it also led to kind of increased academic programs too, because if you can imagine moving to some places that had more safety protocols in place, there are also places that had greater academic offerings. So I'd say students who are studying abroad now, I think, have more opportunities academically than I'd say students even 3 or 4 years ago had.
Wow, that's amazing. Really, I mean, it's incredible. So what makes our study abroad programs distinctive from other institutions?
Yeah, so to begin with, I'd say if you look overall at the nation, about 10% of students study abroad. And then if you look at our institutions, it's 50%.
Right.
So, and then if you look at St. Ben's, it's actually 60% of the graduates. So there's about 60% of the Bennies, 40% of the Johnnies who study abroad. So I'd say just the overall participation rates are really impressive. For baccalaureate institutions, so institutions of our size, in the 1920 data anyway, just to kind of get into the weeds, we were number 7 in the nation for semester study abroad. And I think it was number 9 overall for study abroad. So we have a really strong tradition of study abroad in our participation rates. I'd say the other thing that's really distinctive about our programs is the majority of our programs are faculty led. So students are going abroad, they're having an experience abroad, but I think because of the community that the faculty continue to build, it has a connection to the institution. And I'd say the third thing that has been a real commitment to the institutions is that we work really hard to make sure that we're mapping our curriculum and our general education curriculum to study abroad. And that's important. So when students are studying abroad, that the courses that they're taking are counting towards graduation. And so rather than going abroad and just taking a bunch of electives that may or may not count, the majority of courses that students take on our programs are going to transfer back as credit. And so that's just really important to say that if we value it as part of the student's 4-year experience.
And we're committed to a 4-year experience.
And we're committed to a 4-year experience,
Right.
exactly. We need to make sure that these study abroad programs fit into there.
That's great. So I think you've talked a little bit about some of the student outcomes, but what do we know about students who study abroad? Who are they? What is it that they are looking for in their kind of academic experience, and then why does this fit in with that?
Yeah, well, I think the beauty to this answer is, because we really aspire, to be the best of a liberal arts institution, that the students who study abroad are everybody, So, everybody at St. Ben, St. John's will have an opportunity if they choose to study abroad. And there are programs that's more difficult. So nursing being one, but nursing has
Right.
international experience built into their nursing program. Education can also be challenging due to the requirements that they have for education, but then there's an education short-term program that students can take and get credit for their education major. So fermentation, as we talked about, a chemistry student can go and get credit for their chemistry major. So I'd say that there's been a real commitment to try to make sure that every student, should they want to, have the experience to study abroad. And so I'd say that every student, could fit that profile. I'd say in general, the students who we see on the semester programs are junior students.
Right.
And I'd say I don't have a stat on this, Heather, but I'd venture to say that probably at least half of our students haven't studied abroad before or haven't really been abroad before. And so, and what I so appreciate about our programs is that's okay. And we encourage it. And I think part of what we talk about being a community is being a community throughout the process. And it's not just while the student is abroad, it's preparing them before they go.
Right.
And then working with them when they get back to help.
Because
make
that
those
reentry
connections.
is, we talk about that. Anyone who supervises a student or works with students over the course of their 4 years sees that change in them as they return. There's a maturity, there's a sense of self, but reentry can be challenging.
Yes.
And what my experience is that we really do a great job institutionally of providing the supports necessary for that reentry.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And my greatest joy, or one of my greatest joys, Heather, is so we have a group of students called our student ambassadors who have been on a study abroad experience, and then they come back and they won't want to share that with other students. And so it's one thing for me to talk about study abroad. It's another for students who have just come back to talk about it to their peers. And one of my greatest joys is when a student ambassador stands up to a group of students and said, I never envisioned myself studying abroad. And I took a chance because my professor told me to, or one of my classmates told me to, and I did it. And I'm so glad I did it. And it totally changed the way that I saw things. And so to me, uh, I love the fact that students come into the institution wanting to study abroad, and that's great. But I think what I'm also really excited about is to see students who they had not considered it until coming here and being in this environment and
Mhm.
having it put forth
Right.
as something that's such a priority that they say, yeah, I can do this.
I can see myself.
I can see
in this.
myself. And then so one of the other things that we see, and you hear this across the schools when students come back, you see this boost in confidence that students
Mhm.
have. And dare I say, maybe a boost in maturity too in some cases. And so, but this idea that I didn't think I could do it, I did it, I survived, I thrived, I
Right.
had a great experience. And if I can do this, I can do anything.
And that's our job,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we've been having these conversations a lot about our mission traditions and how we tell the story about who we are, and what 17-year-olds and their parents are looking for in an institution. And often these things that we do, liberal arts, a college for women, study abroad, um, rural, our location, Catholic, Benedictine values, those are things that we all know who are close to St. Ben's and St. John's are so moved by, and it's profound. We've seen it in alums, we see it as employees, we see it as parents potentially. But if everyone knew what the power of all of those things before they got here and had already experienced, they probably wouldn't need us.
Yeah.
And that's partly why a 4-year residential college experience in the liberal arts and grounded in these mission traditions is so powerful, because we allow people to come to them, come as they are,
Mhm.
and then be changed by that. And that's our job.
So, Heather, if you'll humor me for just a
Of
minute,
course.
I do want to hit on, because I think this is getting towards, we talk about our values, that we actually have an institutional learning goal.
Yep, that was my next
Okay,
question.
good, okay. So I'm going to segue, and I said that this was the only thing that I was going to read from, because I just want to be sure that I get this correct, because I think it's important. So we have an institutional learning goal, there's 5, and one of them is engage globally. And so engage globally is this. So it says our students will commit to global engagement, civic engagement, and citizenship. These skills include an understanding of justice and the common good, awareness of social responsibility, and knowledge of world systems and their points of intersection and divergence. And so I bring this up, Heather, and I think it's so important because I do want to make one distinction, a very important distinction, is that when we talk about study abroad, it's not about trips, and it's not
Right.
about trips abroad, because quite frankly, if a student just wanted to go abroad, there are cheaper ways
Right.
to do it. You go to the travel agency and go, and that would be a trip abroad. But our commitment as a liberal arts institution is, as this institutional learning goal says, it's not just about going abroad, but it's about contemplating the common good, about contemplating social justice and the points of intersection. And I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that we're going to X location abroad to try to bring social justice to these populations,
very
or
clear,
to
yes.
bring a common good, but to go and to learn and to be challenged by the communities that we live amongst, and to come back and to reflect upon that experience, so that when the students graduate, then they can be part of creating social justice and to be global citizens who really drive the common good. And the other thing that I'll say is, we talked about COVID, and COVID was awful because it shut down programs, but if it taught us something, it also taught us that we're globally interconnected,
Right.
and that no longer can we isolate ourselves. And so the challenges that we have today are global challenges. And so I think it's so important that students go, not just to check the box and say, I've done it, I've studied abroad. 75% of employers are going to find this interesting, and that's good. That is good. But to also say, this is important for them to be global citizens and to be a graduate of St. Ben, St. John's, to have had this experience.
This is an aside and a personal story, but my children are in a Spanish immersion program in the St. Cloud School District. And when my son was entering kindergarten, his teacher was a Chilean woman, Bonjean, amazing, shout out to Bonjean. She gathered us, it was the open house, right? She gathered all the parents and our kindergarten children, and she she said, I want you all to introduce yourselves, and I want you to share your goal for your child this year. She's like, I'll start. I'm Professor Bonjean, and my goal for your children is to be global citizens. And at the time, my son was crawling and touching every child in the circle. And I thought, my goal is that this child sit still and do what he's told. But I do think there is that, I think about her all the time, and I think about that, how enriched he was and has been from that experience and her experiences, and continue to be. And my mother's from Mexico City too, and so to watch and to be a part of these communities that are making such an effort, and internationalization, I think, has been personally, like, I see that goal for our students here is the same as my child's kindergarten teacher, but I do think it is the ultimate goal, right? We are graduating our students out into the entire world and a part of that, and I do think our Benedictine heritage so calls us to that. So it's great.
I completely agree.
So tell us a little bit about internationalization. Yeah. So moving beyond study abroad, but what does that mean? And define it for us, and tell us why we should care.
Yeah, so, I think it's important to note that internationalization is really, and similar to what we've talked about at Engage Globally, it's realizing that intercultural understanding isn't something about crossing the border of the United States and going to another country. International understanding and international competence involves understanding difference amongst us and in our own space. And I think one of the things that when we've worked with the Multicultural Center here at St. Ben's and St. John's is that when we talk about the skills that are needed to really authentically travel internationally and engage with others, it's not all that different from the same authentic skills that we would practice and try to embody on campus when we're also celebrating difference among us. And so internationalization is really a way, in my mind anyway, to move the lens of international from a geographic experience to really a personal, systemic experience that happens all around us. And we've participated now, we're in the second year of a cohort of the American Council of Education, what they call as an internationalization lab. And so we're really excited to be part of that cohort. But the 2 years has been looking at what are the things that we do well. And so we've talked about study abroad and the strengths in that. But if I'm really being honest, one of the things that we have not done well is to really have a really kind of sober conversation about how are we engaging internationally on our own campus? How are we making sure that people's different experiences, different cultures, that we're not just aware of them, but that we're integrating them into our experience? That it's more than just kind of holding them up for one event, every year, to saying that because you are here, we will all change,
that idea of transformative inclusion.
Exactly. And when we talk about becoming community, This is it. And at the core of internationalization and this transformative inclusion is really what we talk about with Benedictine values, and listening and to be among each other. And so I really feel like this internationalization journey has really in some ways been a call to action and a journey back to our roots. And so we're in the process of writing up the final recommendations, but I think what you're going to see are recommendations that involve embracing our existing institutional learning goals and embracing them in the curriculum.
And embrace difference is one of them.
And it is, yes. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about our institutional learning goals of Engage Globally, and then another one is Embrace Difference. So then how do we make sure that we're really supporting it to be part of the curriculum? I'd say another key area, and an area that we have fallen short on, is how do we fully support our international students and our students who are coming here for 4 years. We have beautiful campuses, as everybody knows, beautiful campuses, but on holidays, something that we have heard for decades now is that if you're an international student and that you don't have a car, or even if you're not an international student, if you're a student who doesn't live in the area, these campuses can be very lonely and isolating. So how do we make sure that if we're making the commitment to get students here, that we make the commitment to make sure that they are taken care of and supported? And it's not just student development's responsibility, it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we're doing this as a community, to support them. I'd say that one of the other things is that, and something that I'd be happy to chat briefly about too, is that we're really pushing for is that if we say study abroad is an experience that should be within the reach of all students, we need to make sure that we have the ability to the best of our ability to support these students. And what that means is that there is a gap and a growing gap in what a program costs to run, to provide all these experiences that we talked about, and students' ability to pay for those experiences. Again, in our era, if I can call on that, it was pretty much you work a summer, you pay for a plane ticket, you can go. That's not the case so much. The expense is greater, and so one of the things that we will really be advocating for is to try to increase the scholarship monies, to try to increase the fundings that would be available for students to help support and supplement those experiences.
And this is something too, I know we talked, earlier, the stats I talked about, there being a difference between the percentage of Bennies and Johnnies who study abroad. And I'm curious if sort of, I know one of the things I understand that's a difference is actually the amount of endowment and funding that's available for St. Ben's students, at St. John students. As a reminder, we do have two separate endowments and they do fund slightly differently, but this is a space where I think we can see that there is a difference. And let me talk a little bit about that.
So yes, so this is a space where, we work as a joint office and the Center for Global Education, but yet our funding and our scholarship funding for our students, come through two different funding sources. And so we do have more funding available for St. Ben students. And so throughout the United States, you generally see more men studying, more women studying abroad than men. And that's true here.
Right.
More women study abroad than men. But I have to believe that one of the variables that's driving that is that we just have more scholarship money available for Bennies than we do for Johnnies. But I know that every year when students will apply for programs, they'll get into programs, and we'll also have like scholarships that they can apply for that. Every year that there are groups of students who because they're not able to get a scholarship because there are limited scholarship funds, that they choose not to go on a program. And so I think that is a challenge, that we have. And
the scholarships will cover tuition and some of the academic costs, and we do have some funds that exist to cover the incidentals and other things too. But when you're traveling abroad, you also want to be able to make sure your cell phone works while you're abroad, or have some money to spend on those nights. Those are some of those other things too. And not all scholarship doesn't always fund that too. So there's just all of those things, those challenges that even that small gap in, $1,000 could be just insurmountable for some students.
And so Heather, this is I think a difficult number to say for sure, because the costs differ by program. And so, I encourage the people watching that if they're interested, they can go to our website. That information is on there. And so you can see the cost of the programs. But one of the things, especially with the semester programs, that we want to highlight is what is the difference in cost between what you'd pay on campus versus what you're paying on a study abroad experience. And so I'd say on average, and in some cases it will be more, in some cases maybe less, it's probably about $5,000 to $6,000. And that can be an insurmountable amount, for students if there aren't other means available. And then I'd say the other thing that we have to be aware of, and this is the reality of the situation, is that a lot of students, and I don't know the stats on this, but a lot of students have full-time jobs, and not just 10 to 12 hours a week, but they're working a lot, just to be in college. Well, if you're
loss of income.
yes, exactly.
Along with costs.
So
right?
if you're gone for a semester, you're out that that working income. So that's also more money in addition to the cost of the program.
So I think as we think about internationalization and this work, I mean, that's clearly a place where we've got some opportunity and continue to think about how we fund that and how we really expand opportunities too. I think other, I know there's been talk about sort of instead of study abroad, study away.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Like taking advantage of international opportunities, even within our own borders and in our own community, really.
Exactly. So because I think one of the driving principles is equity. So how do we make sure that as we talked about, internationalization does not have to be geographically leaving the United States. It could happen in the United States. So how do we look at ways, and this isn't a new idea because other institutions do it, about building domestic study away experiences where students could have those experiences domestically. But going back to one of the other things I mentioned, how do we do a better job of supporting our international students who this is their international experience here at St. Ben St. John's, to make sure that once we get the students here, that we continue to support them and to support their needs. And so there is so much that we do well, but there remains to be a lot of opportunity. And so I'd say one of the other things that we're putting forth in this internationalization plan is that as an institution, we really need to think about how do we sustain and support these initiatives. How do we continue to drive it forward and to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, that, we're quite good in higher ed with coming up with a lot of ideas, but then how do we make sure those ideas continue and move forward into the future? So I know that you had President Breeze on, and so it's my hope that as he talks about raising the gaze to the future, that the internationalization conversation, the global engagement conversation can also kind of be part of the larger strategic vision.
And it's a part of our history for such a long time. And you and I were talking actually beforehand that that at least as far back as the 1930s, we had international students here. So we know that there were students from China attending St. Ben's in the 30s, graduating in the 40s. So our history, you mentioned the Bahamian students, is long-standing, and we
and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we really do have these pockets, and this has really been a part of our experience. And really, we think about it, the students for whom St. Ben's was founded were the children of German immigrants, often first generation, born in this country. And so that experience is really true to our roots. That's from the beginning for sure. So we talked a little bit about our past, and I'm sure we have some questions that we want to get to. But before we get to that, so I'm going to ask one more question, because I'd love to just talk a little bit about the future. So what do what do like any of these recent academic program changes mean for the Center for Global Education and Study Abroad? I think it matters a lot. I think people are curious as to what the academic program prioritization process has meant and will mean for study abroad, since there is that language connection often.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's our intention that we will continue to offer programs that students will be able to study their language abroad. And that's been part of moving to some of these different locations, is so that we have the ability to continue to offer language for students. Some of our programs in the past, Heather, were so highly customized that we would need 20 students to run a program just for St. Ben St. John students. But we have moved some of these programs to locations where they're taking programs with students from other universities across the US. And so what that means is that if we have a language where we're not able to recruit 20 or 15 students to run let's say 10 students even to run our own program, those students can still go and have a course abroad and continue to study their language. And so I'd say that we're working to continue to make those programs available. But it might look different than kind of the St. Ben St. John's bubble if it's a smaller group of students. So I'd say that a possible change, but a change that we're adapting to. as we look towards the future, I'd say one of the things that I'm excited about, I continue to be excited about our faculty-led model. I'd say that's our signature. I'm excited to see where short-term will go. Again, we're experimenting with it. COVID hit. It's doing really well now. I think there's still a lot of room to grow. I'm excited to see where internationalization on our campuses go. And I'm also really excited when we talked about the Experience Hub at the beginning of how we work at really, in a really innovative way, getting experience in professional development, Office of Undergraduate Research, Center for Global Education, and Fleischhacker Center for Ethical
absolutely, yep.
Leadership. There's a synergy between them. And I think we're just chipping away at that. And I think that there's so much more when we talk about domestic study abroad, for example, it intersects all of those areas. And so I'm really excited for not only who we've been, but I think that has really just laid the foundation for where we're going to go.
It's great. There's so much good here too. So let's hear from our audience. Do we have any questions, Lisa?
Yes, we do. I have a question from Patricia who asks, is there any consideration for a traveling semester abroad to go to various countries and cities to take coursework from faculty, but also get embedded in the culture, people, architecture, social economic systems, history, to learn about a variety of cultures and countries?
Yeah, well, Patricia, thank you for that question. And I would say that we don't at the moment have like let me just say like a travel through Europe program where you would go, to multiple different countries to experience that over the course of the semester. We've tried within our locations to offer a diversity of experiences. And I'd say like London, for example, would be a good example of that. You're based in London, but there's just so much variety on the London program, on many of the programs for what a student can experience. But we don't have a model where you'd be maybe 3 weeks in one country or 3 weeks in another country and 3 weeks in another. I'd certainly be open to that, but we don't yet have that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, next question is from Mary. It's from the class of 1994. How do you decide to create a new study abroad program in a new location? What's the process like and how does it happen?
Ooh, Mary, that's a good question. And I'd say that it's a very thoughtful process, and it takes about 2 years actually. So from the time we started in a location, it's been about 2 years of planning. And we start by, I'd say that there are really 2 key drivers that we look at in at least our semester program locations, actually in all of our locations, but it's health and safety. Do we think that this location has health and safety protocols in place to support our students? That's primary. And then the second one is saying, do we believe that there's enough academic support in this institution and that there are courses offered that are going to keep our students on track for graduation in 4 years? And so it's looking at those 2 key factors. And then we also survey the students and survey the faculty from time to time to see where are the interests among the students, where are the interests among the faculty. And then we also try to keep our eye out of where are the areas that we think are developing that we're not yet. So
Anything fun on the horizon?
Well, I'll just be really honest right now. I think one of the things that we're aware of is that we're really heavy in Europe.
Right.
And so, we're really working right now to stabilize our programs, if you will. And I use the word stabilize our programs outside of Europe because Europe launched right off, like they're the first set of programs to launch right after COVID. And so then the second year after that, we had a lot of our programs in the Global South. And so we're continuing to kind of build those programs, get students going back to those programs. But then, we've also talked about Southeast Asia. India has come up of different locations. And so the other thing that I would say to this question is that short term is more nimble in the sense of like and that's one of the reasons why we're really interested in short term is there's a lot of time and energy that goes into developing a semester program and making sure that all these things go into place. But short-term programs that we're able to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and to experiment in areas. And so I'd say that's an area where we'll also kind of reach out to faculty to say, hey, we think that this might be an interesting area for a short-term program. Would you be interested in developing it? So to give you a prime example right now, Ellen Block is going to be leading a global health program to Zambia in May, because we had a global health concentration that came up and a
Right.
lot of interest in that. We knew,
Especially coming off the pandemic, people are we live in a global world.
yes, yeah, and we knew that we were looking for something kind of in Southern Africa, and so we found a great partner in Zambia, and so we kind of brought the two together. And so I think that's an example of looking for a need with our curriculum and student interest, and then trying to see where's an area that we could kind of supplement the work that we're doing already in study abroad.
That's amazing. It's great. One more question?
Yeah, we have time for one final question. And this is from Beth from the class of 99. As someone who has studied abroad, what opportunities can we do to support our programs? Can we donate directly to specific programs?
Is there like an 800 number that could go on the bottom of the
Give
screen?
CSB.com. I'll let you answer that generally, but I guess the question is it individual programs that really need support? Are we really thinking about, when I think about support, I think kind of in two places. Programmatic support, which is the Center for Global Education, which is absolutely an option for people to support, but then also our students. And I think that's that other portion of, student scholarships. And there's always more opportunity for that. But tell me more. Are there individual programs that are, that need or require sort of different support institutionally?
Yeah, no, and Beth, thank you for your question. So I would say, Heather, and I agree with you. My recommendation, and actually my thought would be, is that I think it's better to give generally, to a fund rather than an individual program. And the reason why I say that is we really want students to be able to choose a program that works best for their experience at St. Ben, St. John's. And so the scholarship money goes to the students then rather than to a program. And then the students will take that money to a program. Right. And so the reason why I hesitate to say direct money to programs is because I really think fundamentally we want to support the students and give them the agency then to say, if qualifying for the scholarship, then they can choose what program they're going to apply it to.
I think that's fair. That's true. I think, I do think too, that as students' interests change too, and their needs and their desires for where they travel to, maybe some locations that really served us and served a certain population in the past, may or may not serve our students going forward. And depending upon the nature of that, I think that nimbleness, our ability to move forward and meet our students' needs, I think is really important.
And to that point, if I could just say one more thing, we went through a lot of change in COVID, as I mentioned, in programming. And so the programming that we have now won't look the same as it did 5 years ago. And we wrestled with that and shed tears over that. But the thing that surprised us, Heather, is our students who went abroad. It was their study abroad experience, and they enjoyed it. And while we were kind of fretting over the historical loss, they did fantastically well. And so that's just a reminder to me of I think we need to trust our students to choose what's best for them and to have it be their experience. And so that's also why I think giving the money to the students through scholarships, for example, is better than saying, okay, we're going to give money to this program, but programs and locations change. But I think our support of students won't and shouldn't.
Right. And I think too, as we develop our strategic plan, I do see this coming up as a part of it, and we'll make sure we communicate with you sort of what the future is and where we're headed, especially after hopefully you'll come back and tell us more about some of your proposals with the internationalization cohort in the lab, and share with us a little bit more.
Thank you. I hope I made the cut to come back to season 2. I'd be honored.
Oh, I think we're at what are we now? We might be at season 3 now.
Season 3, I'm sorry. Please,
that's okay. I think COVID's been,
okay.
This is my first season, so you can come back with me. So, but there's clearly so much going on with the Experience Hub and the Center for Globalization, for Global Education at St. Ben's and St. John's. So thank you for all you do for students to help them engage globally through high impact practices. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you to our audience for joining in and asking such good questions. This is our final episode for this season of St. Ben's at Home, and we hope that you've enjoyed learning about the latest news from campus and following along as we prepare our students to think critically, lead courageously, and advocate passionately. Though the weather wouldn't tell you this, commencement is only a couple weeks away, and we're preparing for next season. So we wish you all a great summer, and please stay tuned for the last word here from Lisa Miller, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you again, Kevin and Heather, for your time this evening. Audience, you can share additional questions or comments on tonight's episode through the evaluation form that will be emailed to you from the Alumni Relations Office. This concludes tonight's episode of St. Ben's at Home, the final episode of the season. You can find additional details about the St. Ben's at Home series on the landing page listed here. We will also share this link in the evaluation email you will receive tomorrow. Thank you for attending.